As you can see, Kitty's pretty tired studying. He's been taking diligent notes. I think he got scared last class, afraid of not passing and having to go to summer school. So he's now ready to begin. And today, guys, is our last bit of presentation unit for the year because of this COVID situation. We have two other units that we needed to get to or would have normally gotten to. If you look at the syllabus, this is exactly where we are. But we're going to miss the 1300s, the Black Plague, and nationalism, the rise of nations. But we'll kind of tie it in at the end here, and I hope you'll appreciate that. Okay, ready to go. The last time I alluded to the power of the church rising up. With knights, the two institutions of sorts come together in the Crusades. In 1095, Pope Urban was worried and upset because of the rise of Islam in the world, and specifically the region around Constantinople, which, if you remember, was by Constantine claimed to be Christian, but through the spread of Islam, that was converted to Islam, and the spread of Islam moved all the way then ultimately into Jerusalem, the holiest of cities for Christians. And so there was this rise up to do something about it because the Turks, the Muslims, ultimately took over Jerusalem. And according to Pope Urban, he said that God spoke to him and said God wills it. That will would be to reclaim that land with force in the name of God. This is what starts from Pope Urban, what we know of as the Crusades, one of the darkest points in Christian history. There were 8 total, spanned about 200 years, from approximately 1100 to 1300 AD. Where we have this name is we have a crusader as a knight who fights for God. He's on a crusade to reclaim that land in the name of God, and so we call him a crusader. There are approximately 50 to 60,000 crusaders that were assembled. If you remember, when an individual's knighted, they make an oath to 3 people. First one's God. Right there, God wills it. Second one, the Lord. The Lord obviously is doing God's will, so he turns over these knights to go and fight for God in this crusade. That's where they came from. About 50 to 60,000 came from Europe marching, okay? They carried red crosses into battle. And at the start of this, let's look at our 3 groups here that hope to prosper or hope to gain insight. The first is the Pope. The Pope hopes to gain power and strength and strengthen Christianity. The second, of course, are the knights. They hope to gain maybe wealth. Think of Alexander's men. And the Pope said that if they fight as a crusader in the name of God, that they maybe would be forgiven for their wrongdoings on earth, their transgressions, if you will. So there's a motive there for the knights. And the third, of course, are merchants along the way, supplying those thousands of people and hopefully enhancing trade. So those are the 3 groups that are hoping to gain something from the Crusades. Approximately 2 years after the proclamation that it's called, the proclamation by Pope Urban that God wills it, the Crusaders enter Constantinople, claim victory there, march down, and I know Ryan Cooney would be all over this on the map, going south down into Jerusalem and liberating Jerusalem. Okay? The catch is that ultimately, after 2 years, 12,000 remain. And of those 12,000, they start to move away, okay, and go back home. After a couple years, it's kind of like the George Bush mission accomplished. And what happens, of course, in Jerusalem is what? Once the Crusaders leave, the Muslims come back. And so this is a never-ending cycle, hence the 200 years. And that's why the Crusades are plural. The knights in the name of God were never allowed to actually just stay and claim that land permanently, because whenever they'd leave, Muslims would come back and claim victory for themselves. There were 8 total. The third crusade was the King's Crusade. That's where we see 3 kings go in. 2 were killed. King Richard the Lionheart, maybe you've heard of him. He lived through that. There were a couple children's crusades because we ran out of people to go fight the crusades because they were already dead. And so we actually saw Christians send children marching to their death, killed by the thousands. So a very, very dark period in church history. The results of these. The Pope's power obviously went downhill. We see increased royal power, that sense of nationalism start to emerge again, because why? The Crusades weakened the feudal period and weakened the Pope. So we see a rise in nationalism. Okay. When we look at Jerusalem, just to give you some modern day input, remember the 3 religions today that control Jerusalem: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. That has gone all the way to the Crusades, with those groups claiming Jerusalem as their own. The third, Constantinople and trade power went down. The trade was shifted more toward Jerusalem. We're going to start to see the Mediterranean, Red Sea area become a conduit now. And the Far East. Friction between the 3 religions. Obviously in Jerusalem, we still see that friction even today, and in the Holy Land region. But 5, increased trade for the merchants. Obviously they came out sweet. That did enhance their life, the Crusades, and they became very wealthy as a result. What I'd like to do now is just briefly, in closing, after the results of New Era, this one's the one we really focus on. We know the church power goes down, Constantinople friction, we know that, we've studied that. Increased trade, royal power, increased trade. We start to see 3 nations emerge: France, Great Britain, England, and Spain. And all 3 are vying for trade. And that's what in the 1300s, 14th century, we see the spread of the plague. That was due to trade with Italy, with the fleas that carried the plague. But nonetheless, it didn't stop trade. There was a clamoring for more and more trade in the 1400s. And each of these nations, the big 3 nations, wanted to find the greater or better trade routes. And if you remember, some of the explorers at that time ranged from knowledgeable to not very knowledgeable. The Earth's flat. They're afraid something would happen if they go away too far from shore. They'd be lost at sea, hard to get crews, etc. But the 3 countries, once again, England, Spain, and France, were all clamoring for that. And that's why we start to see around Africa, okay, if we had our map, you would see that trade increase in the Asian subcontinent. The question is there a better way? Obviously going east. And there was a Italian explorer, of course, his name Christopher Columbus, who ultimately went to Spain, because Spain was the 3rd in the big 3. They were number 3 in power and prestige. Ferdinand and Isabella consolidated through marriage a huge power broker control of Spain, and he approached them and said, hey, I can do it. And so what he did, with their consent and approval and their support, in the name of Spain, he assembled a crew. He got his 3 ships, the Santa Maria, the Pinta, okay, the Nina, the 3, Nina, Pinta, Santa Maria, and sailed off to uncharted waters. And you guys think, yeah, so what? We know about that. 1492, sail blue, blah, blah. No. They had no idea what was going to happen. As a matter of fact, you don't read this in history books. They sailed out October of 1492, and about halfway through their journey, 2/3 of the way, the crews were starting to talk amongst each other. They wanted to revolt, mutiny. And actually, some said we should kill Columbus. Columbus was set on going and making the voyage. And they were scared. And then one night, a storm emerged in the Atlantic, tossing the ships around like a cork. And the next morning, what happened? They saw birds flying in the air. They saw branches in the water. They knew that land was close. That evening, all of a sudden from the crow's nest, land ho! And keep in mind, what land was it that they ran into? It's not Plymouth Rock. It isn't even in the United States. It's in what was named, Columbus named it Hispaniola, modern day Dominican Republic. Haiti, Dominican Republic, Al, that's what he hit. And what was interesting is the natives, when they saw the ships, they thought they were gods. And now imagine these men that wanted to mutiny Columbus. All of a sudden the native women are coming out naked, bearing gifts of gold. Do you think that the men liked Columbus then? You better believe it. That's why he went back twice, claimed that land for Spain, and that opened up then the New World and permanent settlements with Spain in the south with Columbus, in the New England states with Great Britain, with England, and then France into the Canadian regions. And so we see these three countries start to carve up the New World. We have Columbus then that established that. We then see a settlement. We see a new government. We see an independent country called the United States in 1776, right? We get Thomas Jefferson in power at the turn of the next century, the 19th century. We see him talk to a buddy of his and gets another guy called who? Lewis and Clark to go and get an exploration established in this new territory that Jefferson purchased called the Louisiana Purchase. That's where? Right here, guys. And that, my friends, with Lewis and Clark coming through where? Our backyards, right here. And establishing now Western Montana is the culmination of where we are today. In not room 301, June 2nd, but we were supposed to be there, okay? That is the world history in room 301 from the dawn of civilization that we talked about, remember prehistory, all the way through connecting you today, COVID-19, coronavirus 2020 in Missoula, Montana. Guys, it was a joy and a privilege teaching this course. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did, and hopefully you're going to stay safe. Know you're missed and loved. Good luck on the test Thursday, news quiz Friday, final next Friday. Bye.